And welcome to everybody, and I'm really glad to see a full house today, and I'm glad that there will be people listening on the radio and also watching this on television. It's important to be an informed voter, and that's really the purpose of tonight's event, so that you can become more involved and really get to know who the candidates are and what their positions are on the issues. All of the candidates were asked to sign a consent form that had the ground rules for this evening's forum. Some of the main things that they agreed to was that they would have 1.5 minutes for an opening statement, 1 minute for a closing statement. They will alternate who answers each question first. They will have up to 1 minute to respond to the questions, and that time does not carry over if they don't use the whole 1 minute. There are timekeepers here, and they will hold up signs at 1 minute during the opening statement and at 30 seconds at both the opening statement and during the answering of questions. And they will hold up a stop sign. Oh, there's a 15-second. Okay, they'll hold up a 15-second warning and also a stop sign. So please pay attention to them, and when I see the stop sign, I will ask you to stop speaking, and we'll move on to the next question. The questions have been submitted by the audience. We have our league members who are looking at the questions and trying to combine anywhere there are duplicates so that we can get through as many questions as possible tonight. And the candidate who gives the opening statement first will give the closing statement last, no matter where we are with the questions, so that that way we don't have one candidate giving the opening and closing statements first. So, with that being said, the order of speaking was determined by a coin toss between our two candidates for state representative, who are Sam Yingling, a Democrat, and Rod Drobinski, the Republican. And just to give you a little bit of information, I'll read a position description for the state representative. This is very brief. It says, the Illinois House of Representatives is the lower house of the Illinois General Assembly, the state legislature of the state of Illinois. The body was created by the first Illinois Constitution adopted in 1818. The State House of Representatives is made up of 118 representatives elected from individual legislative districts for a 2-year term with no limits. Along with the Illinois Senate and Governor, it is vested with the power to make laws, come up with a state budget, act on federal constitutional amendments, and propose constitutional amendments to the state constitution. The state legislature has the power to make laws and impeach judges. So whichever one of these gentlemen you elect to the state legislature, those are the things that they are going to be doing. So with that, we'll get started, and Sam Yingling won the coin toss, and he will be speaking first. You have 1.5 minutes for an opening statement.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I want to thank the coalition that put this together and made this possible. I think that having civic discourse during our elections is very important. I also want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your evenings to show interest in our electoral process and further educate yourselves. My name is Sam Yingling. I currently serve as the state rep for the 62nd District. I have been serving for about 18 months. I was elected in 2012. If someone 5 years ago told me that I would be serving in the House of Representatives in the state, I would have said, there's no way. We've accomplished a lot over the past 18 months. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to serve you, and I would greatly appreciate the opportunity to continue to work hard for you in Springfield and help get the state back on the right track. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rod Drobinski, you have up to 1.5 minutes.
Right, thank you. My name is Rod Drobinski, and I'm running to be your representative because, quite frankly, our state is a mess, and we need someone that's going to fight for the hardworking taxpayers of this district. I have spent my professional career being a prosecutor with the Lake County State's Attorney's Office. For over 12 years, I've fought for victims of crime I have fought to make our community safer and better. I'm running because, unfortunately, we're not being represented appropriately in Springfield. My opponent spent his career in politics, and he's run by telling one thing and doing another. He tells his voters that he's an independent, but yet he votes with Michael Madigan over 98% of the time. He tells the voters that he's independent, but he takes over $100,000 from Michael Madigan's corrupt political machine to run his dirty campaigns. He says that he's a tax cutter, but yet since he's gone down to Springfield, he has not done one thing that has actually given the hard-working taxpayers of our district any real tax relief. And that has to change. I'm running because I want to represent you. I want to represent the taxpayers in this district because we deserve a break, and that's exactly what I'm going to give the voters here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the first question will be answered first by Rod Drobinski, and the question is, what is your position on Senate Bill 16, which deals with school funding?
Well, I am completely against Senate Bill 16, especially the way it is now. Like many of you, I'm a husband and a father, and I send my daughter to public school in Fremont Public School District. As soon as Senate Bill 16 was passed by the Senate Democrats downstate, I looked into it, and I found that almost every single school district in State Representative's District 62 is going to lose money. Schools from Grays Lake are going to lose over $2 million a year. Schools in Wakanda are going to lose over $3 million a year. In total, all the schools that lose money as a result of Senate Bill 16 in our district are going to lose over $12 million per year. And that's going to cause our property taxes to go up. It's going to hurt our kids. We can't afford Senate Bill 16, and I am in complete opposition to it.
Thank you. Sam Yingling, same question.
Senate Bill 16 obviously addresses something that we desperately need to address in the state, which is education funding overhaul. There's obviously been much debate about this, but something that I do need to correct is that although my opponent is correct that some school districts would suffer, the Round Lake School District would get over $5 million under this. So there is something to keep in mind when you're looking at the 62nd district and looking at the population in the Round Lake School Districts and how the Round Lake School Districts are affected by this. I agree that I think it's premature to be voting on this. I anticipate there is going to be a very rigorous debate in the House of Representatives on this. What I would like to see is ISB to put together more than a 2-year projection. Right now, that's it. They just gave 2 years. I would like to see up to a 10-year projection on that so we can have an understanding of the full impacts.
Thank you. Our second question will be answered first by Sam Yingling, and the question is, can you please explain your position on the state income tax increase?
Sure. I've been very, very clear on this. I was down at the General Assembly when the state income tax was increased to its current level. It's something I have been vocally opposed to. It's something that I have consistently been on record as opposing. There was an attempt at the end of this past cycle to extend that income tax, and I was one of the vocal advocates who said, no, we don't, that's not the right direction. One of the issues that we're facing here in the state is the fact that the Illinois General Assembly and the Illinois government has a serious credibility issue. And although I wasn't in the General Assembly when this tax increase was passed, the commitment was made that it would be temporary. And so I feel that it is my obligation to uphold that commitment as well as provide tax relief to working families. So I am against the tax increase. I've always been against the tax increase, and that is what my position is.
Thank you. Rod Drobinski, same question.
Well, I believe that tax increase needs to be sunset, and we need to go back to the tax rate as it was back in 2011. I think that the politicians in Springfield lied to us when they told us that money was going to go to pay down our debts, because it didn't go to that purpose. It went to increase budgets across the board, and that was unfair to the taxpayers here in this district. I think that tax hike needs to be sunsetted. Now, it's fine that my opponent tells you that he's against the tax hike. However, he just voted for the 2015 budget, which spends more than we're going to take in. And I don't understand how you can say that you're opposed to tax hikes when you're spending more than you're taking in. How is that gap going to be filled? It's going to be filled with tax hikes. It's going to be filled with more debt. You can say all you want that you oppose tax hikes, but if you spend more than you take in, you're effectively forcing tax hikes on everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
I get a 1 minute rebuttal.
No, we do not have rebuttals. Okay. The next question will be answered first by Rod Drobinski, and the question is, what is the first piece of legislation you want to introduce?
When I get down to Springfield, I've worked as a prosecutor now for over 12 years, and I've specifically worked on gang issues for over 7 years. If I were elected to go down to Springfield, the first piece of legislation I would introduce would be enhancements on gang crimes. I think what our society needs to recognize is we need to address the problem, not the symptom of what we face in our society. Too often when we see gun violence, we blame the gun. When someone gets a cancer, we blame the cigarette. When someone gets overweight, we blame the fast food joint. The fact of the matter is, when a shooting happens, 90% of the time it was driven by gangs. So we need to address the gang problem that is becoming more and more of a problem in our community here in the 62nd District and in Chicago to our south. What I would propose is an enhancement on all crimes if the prosecutor can prove that whatever crime was committed was done in the furtherance of gang activity.
Thank you. Sam Yingling?
One of the first bills that I introduced when I went to Springfield was a government consolidation bill. We in Lake County have the 15th highest property tax property in the entire country. And this is something that I've been very passionate about, is government consolidation and the elimination of more than our 7,000 units of local government. All we have to do is look at our property tax bill to realize how overtaxed we are with all of these redundant and duplicative layers of government. That is an issue that I would push again. Another bill that I co-sponsored when I was down there is a property tax freeze. I don't have to tell you about the market crash that happened. And when our values go down, our property taxes should not be going up. People cannot afford to do that. As they're losing their wealth, they can't afford to be paying more in taxes. So I would also be pushing and reintroducing a property tax freeze bill in a declining market.
Thank you. The next question will be answered first by Sam Yingling, and the question is, what is your feeling on increasing the minimum wage and the effect it will have on small businesses?
And I think that's a great question. This is obviously something that's going to be on the ballot. There's a non-binding referendum question that will be on the ballot. I think that we live in a morally bankrupt society when we allow someone to work 40 hours a week and still be forced to live in poverty. I just read an article today that the buying power of our minimum wage goes back to the 1968. So since 1968, the minimum wage, people earning the minimum wage have not seen an increase. I support an increase in the minimum wage. I do support one, though, that exempts people who are 18 years and younger. I understand that you do have a lot of positions that are seasonal or part-time jobs, and a lot of that is training. But I do support a minimum wage. I believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. We have seen repeatedly that when people who are earning the minimum wage, they don't have a choice but to spend the money. They have to spend the money to survive. That will lead to economic growth. Cutting them off at the knees and further preventing people from being able to earn a living is wrong.
Thank you. Rod Drobinski?
Thank you. I believe that Illinois has the 4th highest minimum wage in the country, and we have the highest minimum wage in the Midwest. The big problem.
Good job, Gilda.
Thank you. Hello? I think the whole system.
Hello?
All right. The biggest problem that our state faces is not the fact that we have a low minimum wage. We have one of the highest minimum wages in the country. The problem that we have is we don't have enough jobs. And if we raise the minimum wage now, we will kill jobs in our state. And it will hurt hardworking families that are trying to get by. I don't support cutting the minimum wage, unlike what mailers on behalf of my opponent have said. My opponent's allies in Springfield have sent mailer after mailer to the district saying that I support cutting minimum wage, and that is absolutely false. It is not based on anything close to the truth. But I don't believe that we can raise the minimum wage given the fact that our job situation is so horrible. We have a tough economy, we don't have enough jobs, and raising the minimum wage, anybody that has ever studied economics, and I studied economics at Notre Dame, I can tell you that raising the minimum wage will kill jobs.
Thank you. Okay, I'll try to speak loudly and maybe we can get this fixed. I don't know if we have any technical people in the room who could try to work on this. The next question is, have either of you ever voted on term limits, and what are your views on term limits? And this will be answered first by Rod Drobinski.
I am completely in support of term limits. I think that if 8 years is enough for the President of the United States, I think it's certainly more than enough for legislators in Springfield. We in Illinois have legislators who have been down there for 42 years, 30 years, 20 years. These people have corrupted our system, and I think we need to show them the door. That's why I support term limits, and I would push to get term limits here in Illinois.
Thank
Still
you.
use the mics. Still use the mics so it goes on the radio.
Can we use the mic?
We're still getting them on the
Still on the radio.
All right.
Sam Yingling?
I think there is a key difference between my opponent and me as it pertains to term limits. I've always been a vocal advocate of term limits. One of the very first things I did when I was Avon Township Supervisor was pass a resolution supporting term limits. The very first thing that Mr. Drobinski did on the library board was vote against term limits for the library. So I find his comment somewhat disingenuous when he sits here and advocates about the need for term limits when his own actions have spoken to say he's against term limits. But he sits here before you now and tells you that he's for term limits. My actions speak for myself. I've been consistently on record as supporting term limits. I even voted to support term limits at the township level. So I think there is a stark difference here on this issue between my opponent and me.
Thank you. The next question will be answered first by Sam Yingling. And the question is, how will you deal with tax cuts, and where would you make the cuts, and how would they affect the most vulnerable community members?
This is an issue that is going to require very vigorous debate. I've always been a strong advocate for government consolidation. When you look at the billions and billions of dollars that are tied up in duplicative governmental bodies that can be released for education, for human services, that's an area we need to look at. And the legislature, and quite frankly, we as the people of Illinois, if we want to fund all of these programs, we're going to have to look at funding, we're going to have to look at levels of funding, which may include government consolidation, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that we need to start having a serious and educated dialogue about that issue moving forward, and that is something that I think can easily be done. There's already legislation that's sitting on the table, waiting for action to take place, and I think that can resolve a lot of our funding issues.
Thank you. Rod Drobinski?
Again, I believe that as far as the cuts to the budget that need to be made, I think that politicians in Springfield that sold us that tax hike back in 2011 have to live with the promises that they made. I believe that the budget lines that were increased after that tax hike was passed, I think every budget line needs to go back to 2011 because those people should not have expected to have that money past 2015 in the first place. That money should go back to the people where it belongs, back to the taxpayers. You know, again, we have a difference here. My opponent says one thing, he does another. He says that he's for fiscal responsibility, he doesn't want the tax hike to stay in place. But again, he voted for a budget in 2015 that spends more money than it takes in. He says that he's for term limits, but it went down to Springfield, he did nothing on term limits, not one peep. He's been in office now for 2 years, and he didn't do anything to support term limits. He says one thing, he does another.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question will be answered first by Rod Drobinski, and the question is, if elected, will you vote for the Equal Rights Amendment?
First, I want to say that I support wholeheartedly women's rights. My wife was a public defender in my courtroom. We met each other fighting each other in court. My daughter is my whole world to me, and I want her to have every opportunity that I've had in life. But I will tell you that I don't feel comfortable with the ERA as it is currently drafted, because the ERA can be interpreted by courts to force women to go into these enlisted into selective service. I think that the ERA as it currently is drafted can be interpreted by courts to do all sorts of horrible things to women and not help women's rights. So I will fight in Springfield for women's rights, but I would not vote for the ERA as it currently stands.
Thank you. Sam Yingling?
I think this is another issue that my opponent and I disagree on very substantially. We're back online. I am a co-sponsor of the ERA, and I think that it's a very important amendment. I think that for far too long, there have been too many discrepancies based on gender in not only our country, but our state. And I think that it's time, I think the ERA is overdue. I think it's time that we put something in writing that allows women to be treated as equally as men and make sure that they have access to all the same rights that men do. And although my opponent sits here and says he's going to fight for women's issues, I mean, this is a huge issue. The ERA is a major issue. And this is something that grew out of the women's rights movement. This is something that is very pro-woman. And I think that there is a lot more good that will come out of it, and as opposed to this fear-mongering surrounding the ERA that all these terrible things are going to happen. I fully support the ERA.
Thank you. Our final question before we go to the closing statements is, it will be answered first by Rod Drobinski and, I'm sorry, by Sam Yingling. And the question is, what in your past experience makes you uniquely qualified to be the state representative in the 62nd District?
You know, I think for far too long there's been far too much partisan politics in this country. I know everyone is fed up with it, I'm fed up with it. And I even get flack from my own party because I'm willing to work with Republicans. But you know what? Sometimes Republicans have really good ideas, sometimes Democrats have really good ideas, and vice versa. And this is something that I think we've really lost touch of, is needing to build a bipartisanship approach to governing. I'm fed up with gridlock. I mean, I'm sure the majority of you are fed up with gridlock. I am not opposed to working with people across party lines. And that's something that I pride myself on. 3 pieces of major legislation that I've worked on in the past 18 months have been with Republican co-sponsors. We need more people who are willing to stand up and say, enough of the partisan politics, we're putting people before party, and I have consistently represented that in my actions, and that is what we are going to need moving forward in the upcoming years.
Thank you. Rod Drobinski?
I am proud to say that I've worked hard to earn the reputation of being a tough, fair, and ethical prosecutor with the Lake County State's Attorney's Office over my entire career. I've worked hard, not only working across the aisle with defense attorneys, fighting them in court, but also treating them with respect. Like I said before, my wife was the public defender in my courtroom before when we first met, and now we're married. The rest is history. But the fact of the matter is, I know how to work across both sides. But again, what we see in the answer from my opponent is he says one thing and he does another. He says he believes in bipartisanship, but he votes with Mike Madigan, the leader of the Democratic Party, 98+% of the time. He says one thing and he does another, and it happens over and over and over again in his record.
Thank you. We'll now go to the 1-minute closing statements, and Rod Drobinski will speak first, and again, 1 minute.
I'm running because we don't have proper representation here in the 62nd District. We have an incumbent who says one thing and does another. He says he cares about property taxes, but he hasn't done anything in Springfield. He has passed no legislation that has given anybody any real relief on their property tax bills. The only issues that he has ever sponsored a bill on that have ever passed were issues dealing with insects. The Heroin Task Force, which still hasn't produced a report yet for the public to read. And I believe on first Saturday of the month, which it was declared Eat Local, I mean, he went down to Springfield saying that he wanted to fight for lower taxes, for more jobs, but he hasn't done any of that since he's been in Springfield. I will go down to Springfield and I will fight for the hardworking taxpayers of the 62nd District to give them the representation they deserve.
Thank you. Sam Yingling?
I think the clear difference between my opponent and I is that my opponent is full of talking points. Sam Yingling does one thing, says one thing, but does another. I have a very extensive voting history. All you need to do is go on to ilga.gov and you can see it. I've done an enormous amount of work with property taxes, and I'm somebody who is going to go out and fight the battles. I'm not somebody who's going to sit up here at a table and give you one talking point after another. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, not what I think you want to hear. And that is the difference here between my opponent and me. I have fought very hard for the past 18 months in Springfield to get the state back on track. We've paid down, we've gone from $10 billion of unpaid bills to roughly $4. We've reformed a pension system. We've balanced a budget, which is contrary to what Mr. Drobinski has said. And so we need more than talking points. We need substance, we need action. And unfortunately, Mr. Drobinski has neither of those. I have a solid record, I have answers, I have substance. More than happy to talk to you more.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our candidates, Sam Yingling and Rod Drobinski, for their participation in our forum this evening. Let's give them a big hand. Okay, according to our agenda, we have a 5-minute break now.